Most people do not see God at work in their personal lives and therefore do not know how to join Him. This Divine Appointments podcast is to encourage you in your faith, to open your eyes to seeing God's hand at work. My hope and prayer is that by hearing these stories, you too will engage where God is already working and discover God's mission for your life. Welcome to my Divine Appointments podcast. I have my friend Andrea Sanders here today, and she is going to talk about being a supervisor and family to about 4,000 kids in Mississippi, because she is the commissioner for the Department of Mississippi's Child Protective Services. Did I say that right?
Pretty close. Yes, it's a mouthful.
And Andrea and I go way back to Millsaps College together. Actually, I looked up to her on campus and in sorority.
Thank you.
But she's a friend, and I admire her and what she does with her work every day. So I'm first going to read my theme scripture, and that is Psalm 105, verses 1 through 5. And that is, give thanks to the Lord, call upon His name, make known His accomplishments among the nations, sing to Him, make music to Him, tell about His miraculous deeds, boast about His holy name. Let the hearts of those who seek the Lord rejoice. Seek the Lord in the strength He gives. Seek His presence continually. Remember the miraculous deeds He performed, His mighty acts, and the judgments He decreed. So just a few years ago, Andrea Sanders was working as a general counsel for the Department of Human Services, but she was uniquely qualified with her social work background, many years in social work, and then she went to law school to now take over such a big job at the Mississippi Department of Child Protective Services. So how long have you been there now?
It's 2.5 years.
2.5 years.
Yeah.
And I'm amazed at how much is under the umbrella of this department, but can you tell us kind of in general what all your responsibilities are?
Sure. Traditionally, we receive the calls from the community at large when someone's concerned about a child being abused or neglected. So we run a 24/7 hotline. That's how a family or child becomes involved with our agency. Depending on the circumstances of what's reported, we go out and do an immediate investigation in people's homes, in their families, behind the closed doors of their houses. And I've talked to you about how I think that that's really sacred space. We're in a place with children, and looking at how people live and how they parent. But our primary objective is to protect children who are vulnerable and who can't protect themselves. And it's a difficult decision when the right time to make that call is. But we respond to those investigations. We also sometimes, unfortunately, have to take children out of their homes for their own safety. We don't actually do that. We have to work with the court. As you can imagine, that's a serious legal matter to take someone's child from them. So we work through the youth courts in the state of Mississippi. We gather evidence and take it to them. And then if we take the child out of their parents' custody, we are then standing in the shoes of the parents. The state becomes the custodian of the child. So we have to have a warm place for them to sleep, all the things that a child needs. They still need it when they're in the state's custody. So either a foster family or depending on what the need of that child is, we look for placement that can provide that safe space while we try to sort things out in their family.
So I did not realize that she said they are basically on call 24/7.
We are.
The social workers get the call, and you, as having done social work yourself, you feel for them because you called them first responders. They are first responders.
Yeah, and they go
sometimes unsafe places.
Yeah, when children are seriously abused and physically abused, or in matters of domestic violence or drug use, those are often unsafe spaces. We do, if we know before we go in that we're walking into a dangerous situation, we can seek law enforcement backup. And in most places, we do have good cooperation with law enforcement. But, child abuse doesn't happen during regular business hours. And I mean, it does happen, but you can't predict when it's going to happen. And so, we run a 24/7 schedule and take those calls all night long, as well as sending people out in the night if that's necessary.
And needless to say, it has a high burnout for your team, your social work team.
Yeah, our turnover rate when I got there was around 30%, which sounds terrible, but the national average is between 20 and 40%. So it's not that terrible, except again, we're standing in the shoes of parents. So if I have 30% turnover, that means that child, even if they're in the same placement, they might be getting a different worker on a regular basis. And so it's very important for us to stabilize the workforce and reduce that turnover. We've done a lot of intentional things to try to lower the stress, increase our staffing, increase pay, and we have successfully brought our turnover rate down to a little below 20% right now, which is a pretty tremendous gain. So
it's got to be hard to do that day in and day out for the social workers.
It takes a lot of stamina.
Talk about the needs for foster families, foster parents, and even adoptive parents. How bad is it? How much need do you have?
We need everybody.
We need
everybody in the state of Mississippi, not necessarily to foster or to adopt, but to do something. Justice Dawn Beam has been sort of volunteering some of her time to help us recruit and get the word out and raise public awareness. And her message is, not everybody's called to foster, but everybody can do something. And that's so true. We have a little under 4,000 children, live souls, in our care and custody right now. We work with about that many children who are at risk of coming into custody. And so they need all the same things your children and my children need. They need clothes, they need a warm bed, they need food, they need to be loved. But they need a lot more than that. They need support and often therapy and a place to heal. So it really does take everyone. Our agency is really just an access point and a conduit. And so, yes, we desperately need families who are willing to take children, usually on a temporary basis, love them like they're their own, walk alongside and support a biological parent that you may or may not, really like or agree with. But helping that child restore their own family or get to a permanent family is the ultimate goal. We want to get them a safe, consistent place to be and to sleep.
And you said it's often drug and alcohol abuse, poverty, neglect, but the goal would be to help that family stay intact.
Yes, 75% of our calls are about neglect, and roughly 75% of that 75% are, it's neglect largely related to deep poverty. And there is we have an epidemic of drug abuse and that has really escalated over the last 2 or 3 years in both our nation and our state. That certainly impacts how people parent and whether or not children are taken care of. It's a disease that really needs serious medical treatment, and we have a lack of that in our state and really in our country.
And y'all try to help connect them to drug and alcohol treatments, like you have ways to connect them.
We are trying to move towards that sort of model where we're more of a helping agency that can, if a child can go back home safely, if the parent gets sober, the best thing for the state, the best thing for the child. is for us to do that and make that investment on the front end. We have some really innovative courts across the state that are running family treatment or drug type courts, which is a way that the court can hold parents accountable through random drug testing and also offer counseling and therapy in their court system. And they're really having a lot of success at reunifying families. Judge Favre on the coast in Hancock County comes to mind. Judge Dickinson is starting something similar in Harrison County, and that mindset of what can we do to stabilize and repair this damaged family, I think will pay dividends in our communities in the long run. But then, if the interventions don't work, we need to move ahead and go ahead and get that child to a place that's going to be permanent and stable, so that they can start to heal.
Is it hard to be a foster parent?
Oh, I think it must be the hardest job of all. People always say I have the hardest job when they meet me and learn what I do. Mm-hmm. I think that fostering is a very hard job. You and I know that parenting's hard, no matter what, under the best of circumstances.
Right.
Fostering is, boy, that's parenting plus. You're taking kids who have already, suffered and often been abandoned or left. Many have had issues with deprivation, not enough to eat in the house. A common behavioral trait of kids who've been in the foster care system is they tend to hoard food. And I hear foster families say, I tell them over and over, there's plenty of food in the fridge. You don't have to go hide it under your bed. But the trauma that's deeply ingrained in that child of living without enough for so long, you can't overcome that with words. It takes time, and it takes consistency, and it takes a commitment. So I think, yes, our goal is to help repair that relationship with their biological family, and using foster families as a support mechanism and a way to almost mentor and help coach that parent can be a very successful model. It doesn't work in every case, and then we need adoptive families. And a lot of our foster families end up becoming adoptive families, but that usually doesn't start out as the primary goal, and it's not always it's not always the outcome. But
I had a
takes special people. That's
friend
for sure.
who fostered, and it was a newborn, and they had the baby for like 2 weeks, and they had some younger, like elementary age kids, and when it was to just foster, and when they came to get the baby for the adoptive family, all the kids were crying, the parents were crying just for those 2 weeks. They were so attached.
I mean, it's like, this is a little living soul.
Yes.
And the most precious form of life there is. You deliver them every day.
Yeah.
And you can't both be a good parent and not get attached.
Right.
So it is a big ask. I do think it's a calling.
And then she's made great strides to improve the long time that the kids are in the system, so to speak. So they had this push called Home for the Holidays. Talk about that.
Yeah, we recognize that, due to a number of factors, it's the complicated process to get through the legal system from the time a child comes into custody until they exit to permanency, and especially for these kids who needed to be adopted, coupled with the pandemic, which slowed the courts down significantly, and some shut down for months. We had a large group of kids who really were ready to be adopted, were living with their family that wanted to adopt them, and
so they were already there, but not official.
Right.
Not official.
And so I was told originally the issue was docket space, that we did not have enough judges with enough time to hear the cases. And I went to the Supreme Court and I talked to the Chief Justice, and he said, we'll get enough judges. We'll appoint special judges. But it turned out when we really started putting the word out and talking to both judges and lawyers, because you've got to have lawyers to represent, to file the motions and have the case heard, people came out of the woodwork. We had judges sign up. Some judges said, I'll work all Saturday and we'll get these cases done. So in 2.5 months, we completed about 250 adoptions. Wow. And they were cases that had just been stuck for some reason or another. So it took some intentional, a lawyer getting into the case, digging around. Maybe we needed to find a signed order that was only in a paper record out in a storage facility somewhere, so that kind of thing holds cases up, and we just dug in and whatever it took was the motto. We will do whatever it takes, and every day matters. And so a lot of people came together to make that happen. Our long-term goal is to really address those issues in the system that create barriers like that and make bottlenecks. So we worked with the legislature this year on a package called our Pathway to Permanency, and we were able to get some legislation passed that I think will reduce some barriers. And then we also really got a lot of awareness from the legislature and really all the stakeholders. And now there's a task force for adoption and foster care that will be starting to meet within the next month to look at really bigger systems issues that might improve outcomes for children and families in the future.
And talk about actually going to hearings, what you get out of that as the commissioner.
I don't have a lot of what I would call fun days, and those are just such blessings. One of the mass adoptions we had on the coast, I had a little girl who was about to turn 18, and she'd been with this family for years, so it didn't seem like a big deal to her. She's a teenager. She was sort of checked out and on her phone, and didn't seem to be paying attention much. And when the judge announced that she was finally and legally adopted and hit his gavel, she just flooded with tears. It was just, she was just overwhelmed with the relief, I think, and the joy of knowing that she, even though her parents had told her for a long time that they wouldn't leave her, there was something about that formality that even she didn't realize that she needed, but it certainly impacted her very
hit
visibly.
Her hard.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Those are the happy days for you.
We get a few of those. Yes. Yes.
What are the struggles? What are the hard parts about your job?
Gosh, each one of these cases or data points is a little living soul, and so the stakes are high. And if you make a mistake, like I said, the stakes are high. It's a life. It's a soul, and so I think that really it can almost paralyze you if you get really. I've learned if I get into the deep weeds of each and every story that it will pull me under pretty quickly. But the struggles are to balance the need for keeping my eye on the big systemic change that will impact generations of kids in the future versus the real pull to just get sucked into every single case and make it right.
Because she's a mom herself.
I am.
And you think about it as a mom,
oh, yeah.
I'm sure.
I'm particularly drawn to the older kids right now. My boys are, about like your boys, 18 and 22. And, we have kids that age out of the foster care system. And that's like a term that was used sort of loosely, or always has been really, like it's a disposition. And, I'm like, wait, what does that mean? And they're like, well, they're no longer in our custody.
They're an adult.
So, they're
just like wash your hands of them.
That's traditionally been,
And you're like, my boys aren't old enough.
Oh no. And what do you do when a pandemic hit? If you are lucky enough to be in college,
right?
What do you do when the dorms close for Christmas?
Right.
What do you do when they close during a pandemic? If you're not lucky enough to have caught up in school all the times you've been moved and you didn't get to college, what do you do during a pandemic when your job shuts down? They become homeless. They end up incarcerated often. But there are so many. I have amazing stories of kids who've become adults in spite of the odds against them But I think that's a real calling to me, is that we need to not be satisfied with letting them age out, but to really see them as all of our kids that we need to wrap around, and make sure that they, if they don't have a mom and dad, to call home and say, hey, I'm overdrawn, or I messed up and I
need help.
I got pulled over with a DUI last night. All those, they're people. They make the same mistakes our kids do.
Right. So what about partners in the community, churches and organizations and volunteers? You talked about Rescue 100 on the coast, like a church community that really has the ideal model for coming around kids.
Michael Memorial in Gulfport, I believe it is, really they saw a need down there, and they started their own program. We're working with them now to really brand and adopt a one consistent model for becoming foster parents that creates a predictable, simpler path for parents who want to get involved. In the past, we've almost made it so difficult for them to become foster parents through state bureaucracy and red tape that it's almost not worth it to them by the time they get to the finish line. So this model really sort of streamlined that path and made it more user friendly. We want to adopt that approach and that level of engagement with parents, and create smaller communities of foster families that the agency helps to foster, to really support them and to grow them, rather than being an impediment to being a foster parent. So we're in the process of rebranding how we approach recruiting and engaging our foster families. And we're working with some of the folks from the Rescue 100 program. Got some folks from CASA, some youth court judges, and this is just an informal group that sort of grew up organically out of seeing the need and people responding to the call. I mentioned Justice Beam earlier. She called me right after New Year's and said, I have a New Year's resolution, and we're going to find families who can help take care of these kids. So it's amazing to watch. I mean, this state is full of people who care deeply about children and family. We might not agree on much of anything, but that is one thing we all agree on, is that children are important and family is important. And so it's a good place to start building a consensus and coalition.
And you said some people are called to a newborn, some people may feel called to teenagers,
and that might change over time.
And helping in between,
yes.
Like tutoring after school or childcare.
There's so many needs. We talked about a family, a guy who just told his story today on one of our meetings, that he's adopted 2 teenage boys who are brothers. It's so important for these kids who are older to be with their siblings. And that's tough. You think about taking on 2 teens. He's a single dad, and so he's come up against some barriers, but the folks in his church have helped him. He's gotten some ladies who've gotten background checked and passed the safety requirements, and so they help him with transportation and just, I used to call it running the mommy cab.
Yes.
It's, it gets to be a full-time job at some
right.
point. So, really that kind of creating that community that some of us have more support than others for parenting. And, I was fortunate enough to have both of my parents and my husband's parents. We were a 2-parent family, and we had lots of community support. People showered us. They gave us the things we needed to take care of our infant. They came and brought us food, and they gave me some respite by holding the baby and letting me take a nap. And so all those things, anyone who parents needs that support. And so, folks who might not be able to ever foster can still step up and do something to help a family who is fostering. And you mentioned that, there are times in life, seasons in life, where it might not be the right time for you to take on infant twins.
Mm-hmm.
But you could, be a place where a introverted, quiet 15-year-old could finish out their school year in her school district. It's
Right.
they're just these are human needs, so they vary a lot.
Mm-hmm.
They're unique. They change over time, and so I think we have to view the problem that way and be more flexible about what do we call fostering, what do we call helping.
Mm. So people would just go online to your website to help, to volunteer?
Yes, our website, and I'll tell you, we're not super nimble right now. We are building out
because
a new
you
portal.
Get 30,000 calls.
33,000 on average to our hotline, and that's not the number I'm going to give you. Our website, www.mdcps.ms.gov. On the homepage has a tab to click on to become a foster parent or to adopt. It's a pretty crude fillable PDF form right now to get started. We are in the process of building out modern technology that will have a much more nimble portal in it over the next year, and we'll have the ability to upload documents, but we're also starting kind of a grassroots recruiting effort in communities where we're setting up events at churches or community centers and sort of putting out the call and let people come to us and tell us what they're led to do, and being prepared to figure out how to plug them in.
So really a whole church could come and say, let us be this community's
absolutely
foster
absolutely group. And I'll tell you that harnessing that kind of power, state agencies are not really, again, not super nimble, not well cut out for. But when you tap into, you start to pull together faith-based and nonprofit organizations and create this coalition of those people, then you end up with a much more responsive network. So people who want to help and get involved, please look for these events that are coming to communities. We're going to start in Gulfport, and we want all comers. I mean, we need all the help we can get.
That's great. That would be your big dreams, your big goals for the future.
I'd like for, my biggest goal would be for Mississippi to see these children as Mississippi's children and these families as Mississippi's families. These are the most vulnerable families. They are, often one paycheck away or one flat tire away from losing their apartment, and it's living on the brink like that constantly that creates trauma for children. It creates trauma for the family, and I think that we have the opportunity to really minister to those people and see them as their own. They're our neighbors. They're
right.
our fellow Mississippians.
And you were saying a generational change for those kids too.
Yeah, my goal is to really to change the system and how it's set up so that it can respond and harness that greater power in the state of so many people who are concerned about children and families, and so big organizations don't change quickly, and I'm not the most patient person in the world, so I'm having to learn some hard lessons about setting up change so that it can be sustained over time.
On that note, I'm going to read your favorite scripture, and it is 2 Timothy 4:7, and I'll let Andrea say why this is her favorite. I have competed well. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith.
Well, partially because
I
am a very feisty fighter, and if you ask my kids what would describe me the best. They would say probably feisty or tenacious. And I am a competitor, and I always have been. Sometimes to my detriment, but I believe that this is a fight worth fighting, and I think it's a fight Mississippi should fight. And I think it's going to take commitment and stamina, and that's why I know that I joked with you earlier and said I quit every night when I go home, and then I get up the next morning and talk myself into going back. But some consistency and stability for this agency and for these children would change the trajectory long term. It's a relatively small pool of kids in the state of Mississippi, but it's representative of the most vulnerable people. And if we could change the outcomes for even a percentage of that population, we could change the state. And so I think it's worth the commitment.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for watching this episode. Now you engage where God is at work. Please make sure to like and subscribe so you will be notified of future episodes.